All right. Well, welcome back. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swaino.
I'm Dave Tenney.
And even though it was just a few minutes ago, who read last? Is that you or me?
I think it's my turn.
Okay.
All right.
So we're starting at Hebrews 11 at verse 13.
Yep. We're going to talk about the heavenly hope. It says, these all died in faith. And just to set this up, these who he's talking about are the people he talked about before this, which was Abraham. And he talked about Noah. And he talked about Enoch. And he talked about Abel. And how they were faithful. And because of their faith, they obeyed God. And the beginning of Hebrews chapter 11 catalogs that. He says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
All right. And again, they received promises, and they saw them afar off. You know, they didn't get to see the end of necessarily the end of these things, but interestingly, you know, when Christ was crucified on the cross, you know, he went someplace to
reassure
those people that those promises had, that major promise of a Savior, you know, was indeed fulfilled.
Yeah, I believe the Bible refers that to as Hades or the Hadean realm.
Yeah.
It's another one of those things. We have a few glimpses of that in the scriptures. Not really 100% sure what that is, but certainly Jesus was there, and it seems like in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, it seems like Lazarus was certainly there as well. So
yeah.
Not really sure.
I mean, it's very simply the Hades is just the place of the dead. Yeah. And, you know, as we can see from the example there in Luke, you know, it is divided into two different places. There's paradise or Abraham's bosom for those that are faithful, and there's torments for those that are not. And a person's choices in life, they choose which one of those they're going to go into, you know, by their choices. You're either in Christ and you're going to be ushered into paradise, or, you know, for in Christ for us, or faithful according to the old law, you know, as far as prior to Christ. But Christ went and preached, you know, that victory to those people.
Yes.
You know, and solidified that. It was one of the things that he did while he was there, and what a glorious victory and a comfort, you know, for those that had been eagerly awaiting for that hope.
Yeah.
You know, all that time.
Absolutely. He talked about those who all died in faith, so that would be all of those faithful of the old law. And I would imagine there were some that were under, I guess, what we would call the patriarchal dispensation that were there as well, that were faithful. You know, you would think, you know, Melchizedek was probably there, and maybe Moses' father Jethro was there, father-in-law. He said he was a priest of God.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're I can't wait to find out.
Right.
Right. One of the things that's interesting is the attitude of those people who they declare plainly that they were pilgrims, right? So you think about Abraham, you know, he really didn't have, he had a promise that he was going to have a homeland, but he never saw that.
Right.
You know, and really the same with all of the patriarchs. They had that promise, but it never came to fruition.
Right. Yeah. Even Moses, you know, was taken away before he had the opportunity to enter, and that was, that was because of, his own choices too.
Right.
That was, interestingly, the reason that he didn't get to enter.
And one of the things, I think the last verse there, at the end of it, he says, "Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them."
Right.
And of course, he's God. God loves us when we carry out His will.
Yeah. Yeah, and just a simple point, for he has prepared a city for them.
Right.
And who's the them?
Right.
It's the faithful.
It's the faithful, absolutely. Verse 17, you want to read through 22?
Starting at verse 17 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, In Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel, and gave instructions concerning his bones."
Okay, so let's go through some of those things. I think it's interesting that Abraham is mentioned twice here. Right, his faith is mentioned when he says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place he would receive his errand." So it talks about him leaving his homeland and his obedience there, and now it talks about Abraham offering Isaac as a sacrifice, and that's a heart-wrenching story.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about they left where they were at there and traveled for several days to get to where he was going to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, and only Abraham. Think of the burden he had to bear during that trip.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable to think about that.
Yeah, the strength and fortitude that he would have had. And then, think of the struggle leading up to that. There was that struggle between Abraham and Sarah, kind of doubting that she would be able to bring forth this child. And all of the things that came about, the birth of Ishmael by the handmaiden, and all those things that, all of that together. And finally they have that promised son, and now God's asking him to kill him and to sacrifice him. So how's that going to work? This, you have to imagine in his human mind, he's thinking, what are you doing? How is this going to work? But it's not our job to second guess God. And I think that God really drove that point home with Abraham. I mean, that really is more than, it's not the way I'd want to learn a lesson.
No, absolutely. And Abraham just had I imagine he spent a lot of time in prayer during that trip.
Right.
And, I couldn't imagine what that would be like. I have a son, you have two sons. Imagine have to take a 3-day trip to kill one of them. and well, being teenagers, you might be okay.
Well, and think, how old would Isaac have been? He wasn't a small child.
No.
And so.
And Abraham was an old man.
In some way, you have to think that Isaac had to have some willingness here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't imagine that he was out chasing him around the wilderness.
No.
And tying him up. It was he had to have the mindset of being obedient to his father.
Yeah. Absolutely, because I would imagine a young man could probably overpower an old man.
Yeah, you at least put up a fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's not recorded in there.
Right.
Then it talks about Isaac blessing Jacob and Esau, and he was blessing them concerning things that were going to happen way in the future. And of course, Joseph the same way. And this, I didn't understand. I never noticed this about Jacob. Verse 21, it says, "By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. That's a detail I don't believe is in the Genesis account.
Yeah, I don't remember that off the top of my head either.
Yeah, I don't remember that in there. So then it talks about Joseph. So Joseph, his dying wishes, take my bones into the promised land with you. He still understands that's what's going to happen.
Right.
So let's look about. You got.
Well, I mean, just Joseph, having gone through the things that he did.
Oh my gosh.
And built up. He certainly had faith to put up with all of the things that happened to him. That were not his doing. Yet he still had that. Still held on to that hope and was fervent.
Joseph obviously was a godly man. You think about. First off, you might think about his that situation with Potiphar's wife. That would have been a difficult thing for a young man to walk away from.
Yeah.
And when he was wrongly accused of that, he wasn't bitter about it, but he goes to jail and he becomes like a model prisoner. And everything he does is successful.
Yeah.
And whenever Pharaoh asks him about the dream, he gives glory to God in front of the king. The character, or when his brothers come, he could have just murdered his brothers.
Absolutely.
Easily, but he doesn't do that.
Yeah, he had that power then.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I really, you think about some of these characters that are mentioned. It's not just this part here where it talks about Joseph desiring his body to be carried out, but it's deeper. Think about Joseph's whole life. It's much deeper and richer than just that.
Yeah. It makes me think of Romans 8:28, speaking of all things working together for good to those that are walking according to his purpose.
Yeah.
And Joseph was walking according to the purpose of the Lord.
Yeah.
And it all worked out.
And I think the idea, especially when you read the New Testament and it references things in the Old Testament, could be a character like we're talking about today, or it could be a psalm or a proverb. It isn't just there just so we can pluck something out of the Old Testament and use it. It's to bring your mind back to that item.
Right.
That psalm, the whole psalm, the whole story of that person.
That would have been the purpose, for bringing it up, for one thing in the Hebrews, speaking to those that would know those things.
Yeah.
It would immediately bring that recollection to the things that they'd heard. And for us, we can go back and look and see these things. And just to add to this, I was talking with someone recently, and they were talking about how sometimes in a Bible study, we'll be talking about something, and we might reference, you referenced Potiphar's wife, and there might be someone listening that has no idea what we're talking about with Potiphar's wife. But I urge you, because we don't have time to chase every squirrel and go down every channel of reference that we speak, look into that yourself. You will be enriched by learning and reading about those instances as well to make those connections. So realize that if you're hearing this and perhaps you're overwhelmed by, what are they talking about? I've never heard of that, or I've never heard of this. Just take your time, one step at a time, and work your way through those things, and certainly you'll be better off for it.
Absolutely. Let's continue on here. We're going to talk about Moses. How much time we got here? Oh, we're only halfway through. Okay. I think it's my turn.
I think so.
I want to read 23 through 29. We're going to talk about the faith of Moses. He says, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ's greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and a sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned.
Yeah, and you think of Egypt, and you think of the wealth and the riches and the ease of life that he could have had. That really does speak to his faith. In fact, I think I might have mentioned it in one of our previous episodes that I just recently came across a report where there are some archaeologists that believe that they found a tomb that would have belonged to Moses. Being a royal, or being part of that family, those things were put into preparation. And this is an empty tomb that was never used, but it was very grand. And it was something that spoke to the idea of his wealth. Now, whether or not is actually the tomb of the biblical Moses, nobody really knows. But it makes sense, and it lines up with the idea of where he would have been and what he was leaving behind.
It reminds me of the parable where Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler, which I guess I never even made this connection. But there's this rich young ruler, and he's kept all of God's commandments. And what's Jesus tell him to do? He says, "Sell all you have and follow me." And he was really upset about that because he had a great wealth. Well, that's exactly what Moses did.
Yeah.
He didn't sell it, but he left it behind.
Yeah. And and I think, that's the point of that particular passage, that, that obviously was the stumbling block for that fellow.
Right.
Not that there are plenty of other people who were faithful and had wealth.
Yeah.
So the wealth wasn't the problem. It was the man's relationship with that wealth and the things that he had.
Yeah, we could be reading about the rich young ruler and him being compared to Moses, but that's not what we read.
Right.
He was kind of caught up in this in his possessions. I want to go back to the first verse, John, because this is interesting.
Okay.
It says, "By faith Moses, when he was born." Now wait a second. I don't know if we had much say in this. This is clearly talking about the faith of Moses' parents.
Right.
Right?
Because they were not afraid of the king's command.
Yeah. So we mentioned the faith of Moses, but in this he also mentions the faith of Moses' parents. I thought that was interesting. So then it talks about when he comes of age. We just kind of talked about that. It says that he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. I would imagine that since he killed a couple Egyptians, they had to have not been happy with him. And who knows what kind of fear that Moses had to endure during his time that he was away, or did they leave him alone eventually, or we were not told.
Right.
But I'm sure there were some other mental consequences of doing what he did.
Right. And when you think of the Moses, he was born, and of course, what was the decree by Pharaoh? He wasn't supposed to have lived, and so his parents didn't fear that command. Because they obviously, it seems as though they trusted in the Lord. And so in doing so, that kind of rubbed off on Moses, and Moses was able to be raised by his parents. Yeah. And that's the intricacy of the way that God works. Mankind can make whatever rule they want, but he's going to uphold the faithful. The faithful are going to be able to make it through, regardless of earthly authority gone wrong. God's authority is going to usurp it, and God is going to win.
Isn't it ironic that Pharaoh makes a decree to kill all of the male babies in Egypt that are Hebrews, and God makes a decree to kill all the firstborn of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's kind of like God kind of like turned that thing back around on them.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting.
And in my, maybe you're getting tired of me telling you about these things, but in my
No.
watching,
I don't have much memory, so it's like brand new every time.
in my watching of a lot of the archaeological things, which just intrigues me. I'm interested by that. I'm convinced you don't need it for faith because
No.
the word is where we get faith. But they have actually found the mummified remains of a young man in Egypt in a royal tomb that actually showed post-mortem evidence of boils all over his body.
Wow.
And so this was obviously where he was buried and the place he was buried and the manner that he was buried. They're very certain that he was Pharaoh's son, dating from that same time that we find that account of the plagues.
Wow.
And there he is.
Yeah.
It makes the hair stand up on your
Absolutely.
arms.
Makes me want to watch that movie made in the 50s.
Yeah.
What was that called? With it's like a Technicolor movie about Moses. It's called The Ten Commandments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I've actually never watched
Oh,
that.
John, you would like that. It's actually pretty good.
Huh.
It's pretty good. It's I mean, the special effects aren't like, modern, but they're
Right.
pretty good for 1950 or whatever they are.
Interesting.
Good movie. Can't remember who the guy was in it, the famous...
It wasn't Charlton Heston.
It was Charlton
it?
Heston.
Okay.
It was, yeah. He didn't even have a pistol. Wasn't he involved in the NRA?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
You're right.
All right. Okay. So what are we doing on time here? Oh, we got 10 minutes. Let's see if we can get to the end, John.
Okay.
Is it my turn or your turn?
I think it's mine.
Okay, read to the end of the chapter, starting at verse 30.
All right, so verse 30, Hebrews 11. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say, for the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to fight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us.
All right. He kind of catalogs a whole bunch of different stuff in there. And he starts off talking about the walls of Jericho. Mm-hmm. And all of these examples that he's given in here illustrate the marrying of faith and obedience. The kind of obedience the kind of faith that's acceptable to God has to be obedient faith.
Yeah.
It's the only kind that God will accept.
Thinking of the walls of Jericho, and that appears to be in Joshua chapter 6. But the idea that the Lord's people are going up against a mighty bunch of folks that they're expecting, and you would think would be a military type battle, and yet what does the Lord do?
He makes them do something that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, ridiculous to the human mind.
Yeah. Don't say anything. Just walk around it, and then on the seventh day, walk around it and then blow your horns.
Yeah, and then the idea that this person that helped them along the way, who had a habitation in the wall, her place was saved.
Yes.
And even in modern archaeology, when they have found this city of Jericho, there's actually a place that
There's a section of wall that wasn't
wasn't
destroyed.
destroyed. Yeah. And so again, God kind of laughs at our logic. He doesn't need to operate within the confines of what we think.
No, not at all. But Jericho is a good example. So, and it uses this illustration of how they defeated that city by their obedience to God, and it talks about Rahab, who didn't perish because she hid the spies and did what was right in God's sight, and they promised that wouldn't befall her, and it didn't. And I believe she's in the genealogy of Jesus.
And there's a whole lesson that can be made by her, because just by the context of who she was, she did not live a life prior to that was a pleasing one to the Lord.
Right.
And yet, by being obedient to the Lord, she was saved.
She was justified for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Verse 32, he says, "And what shall I say? For the time failed me." And he talks about several of the judges, right? So he talks about Gideon, of course. He's the guy that leaves Bibles in the hotel rooms, and Barak, right? So we think Barak and Deborah. What we think about Samuel and David and the prophets. Of course, Samuel was he was the last judge, right? So talks about a bunch of the judges. If you read through Judges, we're given a lot of information, but there's several of the judges that we're just not, there's nothing really said about them. But that they did righteous things and they were right in God's eyes.
Right.
Just the details of what they did aren't recorded.
Right. And just as we're told in other places in the scriptures that, the world couldn't contain all of the things that that even Christ had told the apostles. So, it's we have what we need and nothing more.
Yeah.
Just in the scriptures.
Absolutely. So he goes through all of those things, and then he talks about, now some of these people, like you might be able to, like, who stopped the mouths of lions? Well, we could think about Daniel there, and we might think about someone who was weak but was made strong. We think about Samson there. We might think about a woman received their dead raised to life again. I would think about I would think about Lazarus and his two sisters there,
right?
Maybe, but or I might think about the lady whose son died, and was that Elisha brought him back to. We don't know exactly who every one of these things is talking about, but when you start hearing it in verse 35, and it says, "Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, but they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, chains, imprisonments. They were stoned, sawn in two." I don't recall any of that being recorded in the Bible. Were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. People have suffered for God's sake.
Yeah.
Right. They people in the worst circumstances have put, as an example to us, have put God first.
Yeah. I was talking to a young man recently in studying, and he was reiterating and confirming the idea that to walk as a Christian is not easy. It's not something, I think he used the terms, it's not all puppy dogs and flowers.
Yeah.
And my response was, and if it is, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
It's if you're following and seeking after the truth of the Lord, you're going to run into some resistance.
Yeah.
From the world.
Jesus said his yoke was easy, and it is.
Yeah.
But you don't put a yoke on something that you don't want to do some work.
Right.
Right. And the Lord expects us to be workers. And I think
Right.
that's the idea. The work is not always the hardest, right? Sometimes it can be, but we're expected to produce.
And he's ultimately not asking anything that he wasn't willing to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he goes on here. I think there's one verse I have trouble. I think I had trouble understanding. They wandered in deserts, mountains, and dibs and caves of the earth, and all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. So that means that all of those people that went through all of those horrible things, they in their lifetime did not receive that promise that was brought forth through Christ.
Yeah. We have a little note in there that points us back to 11 verse 2, speaking of the elders who, again, they also didn't, receive the things that were promised.
Right, absolutely.
But they were a part of the process. They
Right.
were-
And the Hebrew writer points out, he says, God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is he's just pointing out the fact that, we've got it good.
Yeah.
We've got something that they never had previously, yet they remained faithful.
Right. Yeah, and it's not being made perfect apart from us. The idea is that, at least what makes me think of, is the idea that we're all going to be the faithful are going to be ushered into heaven, the unfaithful ushered into hell at the same time. There's God is not going to leave any behind.
Right.
It is all in His time. It's all according to that promise. And don't worry, we're all going to make it there together. With those that have been faithful throughout time.
John, let's close her up.
All right. Well, thanks for joining in. We'll pick up in Hebrews chapter 12 next time.